Pinocchio.
A long time ago, in a small village, there lived an old man named Geppetto. He was poor and lonely, but he had a very kind heart. One day, he found a piece of wood and carefully carved a wooden puppet. He shaped its hands and feet, gave it beautiful eyes, and finally carved a big, bright smile. He named the puppet Pinocchio. Then, something amazing happened. The puppet suddenly twitched, waved its arms, and jumped up. Pinocchio moved as if he were alive. Geppetto was surprised but overjoyed, hugging him tightly. The next day, Geppetto decided to send Pinocchio to school. However, Pinocchio preferred having fun over studying. On his way to school, Pinocchio saw a circus. The bright lights and cheerful music caught his attention. Unable to resist, he entered the circus instead of going to school. The circus owner noticed him and said that he was a special puppet and could make a lot of money by performing. Pinocchio wanted to go home, but the owner refused to let him leave. Just then, a blue fairy appeared. She told Pinocchio that if he had been honest, this wouldn't have happened. Pinocchio gathered his courage and said he needed to go home. Miraculously, the circus owner changed his mind and let him go. On his way back, Pinocchio promised himself not to lie anymore. However, he soon broke his promise. When the blue fairy asked if he was going to school, Pinocchio lied, saying he was studying hard, even though he had skipped class to play at the circus. At that moment, his nose grew longer and longer. The blue fairy explained that lying makes his nose grow. Embarrassed, Pinocchio admitted the truth. As soon as he did, his nose returned to normal. Later, Pinocchio met some bad friends. They invited him to a magical amusement park where they could play all day and never have to study. Pinocchio, believing them, followed them to the park. There, he could do whatever he wanted. But after a few days, something strange happened. His ears became longer, and his hands and feet began turning into donkey hooves. That's when he realized that only playing and never learning was a mistake. He regretted his choices and cried. One day, he heard terrible news. Geppetto had gone to sea to look for Pinocchio and had been swallowed by a whale. Pinocchio jumped into the ocean to save him. Deep in the sea, he finally found Geppetto inside the belly of a giant whale. Pinocchio hugged his father tightly, realizing that he had been wrong. He decided to become a good and honest boy. Then he had an idea. Whales hate smoke, so if they started a fire, the whale would sneeze them out. Pinocchio gathered some wood and lit a fire. As the smoke filled the whale's belly, the whale sneezed loudly. In that moment, Pinocchio and Geppetto were blown out of the whale's mouth. When they returned home, Pinocchio deeply reflected on his mistakes. He finally understood the importance of being good and responsible. That night, the blue fairy appeared again. Because Pinocchio had shown bravery and kindness, she said that he was now worthy of becoming a real boy. At that moment, Pinocchio's wooden body slowly changed. He became a real boy. Geppetto hugged him joyfully. From this story, we learn, first, lying always leads to trouble. Second, we must be responsible and work hard. Third, family is important and making the right choices matters. And most of all, with honesty and courage, anyone can become a better person.
Hansel and Gretel.
Once upon a time, deep in a forest, there lived a poor woodcutter and his family. He had a wife and 2 children, Hansel and Gretel. The woodcutter was hardworking, but they were so poor that they barely had enough to eat. One evening, the stepmother said to the woodcutter, If we keep feeding the children, we will all starve. It's better to leave them in the forest." The woodcutter was heartbroken, but in the end, he agreed. That night, Hansel overheard their conversation. He comforted his little sister and snuck outside to collect shiny white pebbles. He filled his pockets, knowing they might need them. The next morning, their father took them deep into the forest. As they walked, Hansel secretly dropped pebbles along the way. Soon, their father and stepmother left them alone in the woods. The forest was dark and scary at night, but Hansel whispered to Gretel, "Don't worry, the pebbles will guide us home." Sure enough, under the moonlight, the pebbles sparkled, leading them back home. Their father was overjoyed to see them, but the stepmother was furious. A few days later, the stepmother convinced the father to abandon them again. This time, Hansel tried to collect pebbles, but the door was locked. So, he took a piece of bread and left crumbs along the path instead. But when they tried to follow the crumbs home, they were gone. Birds had eaten them all. Lost and hungry, they wandered the forest until they came upon a wonderful sight, a little house made of candy, cookies, and chocolate. As they started nibbling, an old woman appeared. "Oh dear children, you must be starving. Come inside and rest." But she was no kind old lady. She was an evil witch. She locked Hansel in a cage, planning to fatten him up and eat him. Gretel was forced to do chores while waiting for the dreadful day. One day, the witch told Gretel, "Light the fire. It's time to cook your brother." Gretel, thinking quickly, pretended not to understand. "I don't know how. Can you show me?" The witch bent over to check the fire, and in that moment, Gretel shoved her inside and slammed the door shut. The witch vanished in the flames, and Hansel was free. Inside the witch's house, they found chests filled with gold and jewels. They filled their pockets and hurried home. Their father was overjoyed to see them. The stepmother was gone, and with the treasure, they never had to worry about food again. From that day on, Hansel, Gretel, and their father lived happily ever after. Hansel and Gretel's story teaches us that courage, intelligence, and kindness can help us overcome even the toughest challenges. Never forget that even in difficult situations, if you don't give up, help each other, and act wisely, you can overcome any challenge.
The Little Match Girl.
On a cold winter's night, with a blizzard swirling around, a little match girl was walking through the streets. She was wearing torn and old clothes, and her bare feet were freezing in the snow. The only thing she had in her hands was a bundle of matches, which was her only possession. That day, no one had bought any matches from her, and she was trembling with hunger and cold as she wandered through the streets. The streets of the city were filled with lights. In the warm houses, people were eating dinner and laughing together, and through the windows, the soft glow of light could be seen. The little girl's stomach ached with hunger, but no one stopped to buy her matches. She kept walking, facing the biting cold wind. As the winter chill grew stronger, the little girl sat down and took out a match. She struck it, and for a moment a warm light surrounded her. In that brief moment, she saw a vision. In the first match's flame, she saw herself sitting in front of a warm fireplace. The fire was crackling, and sitting near it would have warmed her frozen body. She reached out her hands toward the fire, but when the match went out, the fireplace disappeared. She struck another match. This time, a table filled with delicious food appeared in front of her. There was a roasted duck, fresh bread, and bowls of fragrant soup. Her stomach growled in hunger, and she longed to reach for the food. But when the match went out, the food vanished too. Saddened, she struck another match. This time, a beautiful Christmas tree sparkled before her. The tree was glowing with twinkling lights, casting a warm radiance. In that light, she felt a sense of happiness, and the face of her grandmother appeared in her mind. Her grandmother had always smiled lovingly at her and given her warmth. The little girl wished her grandmother could come back to life, and tears filled her eyes. With her last match, she struck it one more time. This time she could see her grandmother smiling lovingly and reaching out her hand to her. The little girl took her grandmother's hand and whispered softly, "Grandmother, I want to be with you." In that moment, her grandmother embraced her warmly, and together they ascended into the sky. They seemed to fly together, and now there was no cold, no hunger, and no loneliness. In the light, the little girl smiled happily. The next morning, people found the little match girl in the street. She was lying in the snow with a peaceful smile on her face. Despite the cold night, she had gone to a warm place with her grandmother in her final moments, and now she was no longer suffering alone. This story teaches us that even in difficult circumstances, we should not lose hope. True happiness can be found where there is love and warmth. We can make the world a warmer place by helping others, showing kindness, and sharing love. Even in tough times, if we don't lose hope and reach out to those in need, the world will become a kinder, more compassionate place.
The Ugly Duckling.
Once upon a time, in a beautiful farm bathed in warm sunlight, reeds swayed by the pond, and ducks lived peacefully on the lush green meadow. One day, a mother duck was sitting in her nest, keeping her eggs warm. As time passed, one by one, the eggs began to hatch. The adorable ducklings emerged and chirped excitedly at their mother. However, one large egg remained unhatched. The mother duck was worried but continued to patiently keep it warm. A few days later, the large egg finally cracked open, and a duckling emerged. Unlike the others, this duckling had grayish feathers and was much bigger. While the other ducklings were small, yellow, and cute, this one looked very different. The siblings whispered among themselves in surprise, and the other animals on the farm found the strange-looking duckling unusual. The ugly duckling was teased by its siblings and mocked by the other animals. Even the mother duck sighed in disappointment. Unable to endure the sadness any longer, the ugly duckling decided to leave the farm alone. The ugly duckling wandered past the pond and into the deep forest. There it met some wild ducks, but they also refused to accept it. Deeper in the woods, it encountered a hunter's dog. Even the dog found the ugly duckling unappealing and simply walked past it. As time passed, the weather grew colder and winter arrived. Snow fell from the sky and the pond froze solid. The ugly duckling, hungry and shivering from the cold, felt completely alone. The duckling collapsed near the frozen pond, exhausted. Just then, a kind farmer happened to pass by and noticed the poor creature. The farmer took the ugly duckling home and cared for it in his warm house. However, the farmer's children played too roughly with the duckling, frightening it. The duckling eventually ran away again, back into the cold world. After a long and harsh winter, the warmth of spring finally arrived. The ugly duckling, having barely survived, found its way to a beautiful lake. There, it saw a group of graceful birds gliding elegantly across the water. They were swans. The ugly duckling gazed at them with admiration, wishing it could be as beautiful as they were. Surprisingly, the swans welcomed the ugly duckling with warm smiles. The duckling, confused, looked at its reflection in the water. Instead of the awkward gray duckling it had always known, a graceful swan with a long, slender neck and shining white feathers looked back. The ugly duckling had never been a duck at all. It was a swan all along. The swans warmly accepted their new friend, and the once lonely duckling was alone no more. With joy in its heart, the young swan soared high into the sky. The animals that once mocked and bullied it watched in amazement. No longer the ugly duckling, it had found its place among the beautiful swans, living happily ever after. Just like this story, if we endure hard times, better days will come. The ugly duckling had to face loneliness and a harsh winter, but in the end, it grew into a magnificent swan. So even when life is difficult, never give up. Always remember you are special and precious just the way you are.
The Mermaid Princess.
Once upon a time, in the deep and vast ocean, there lived a beautiful mermaid princess. She was a lovely mermaid with long hair, and whenever she sang, all the sea creatures would listen intently to her voice. However, the mermaid princess was always curious about the human world. One day, she swam up to the surface of the sea and saw a prince. He was on a ship, laughing brightly and dancing. The mermaid princess was captivated by his warm smile. Suddenly, a storm broke out and the prince's ship capsized. The mermaid princess quickly swam to his rescue and brought him to shore. Before the prince opened his eyes, the sound of people approaching could be heard from afar. The mermaid princess swiftly hid beneath the waves, and the prince, believing that the person who saved him was a princess from a nearby castle, never knew it was her. The mermaid princess, longing to be with the prince, went to the sea witch. The witch agreed to make her human in exchange for the mermaid prince's beautiful voice. The princess gladly gave up her voice, but she couldn't become human. To truly become human, the power of true love was needed. The prince welcomed the voiceless mermaid princess kindly, but he still believed that the person who had saved him was the princess from the castle, with whom he had promised to marry. Though the mermaid princess was sad, just being able to stay close to him and watch over him made her happy. Then, the night before the wedding, a grand festival was held at the castle. The mermaid princess sat quietly, wishing for the prince's happiness. Suddenly, like magic, her beautiful voice returned. "Prince, I am the one who saved you." The prince was shocked and looked at the mermaid princess. Only then did he realize that he had been deeply in love with her from the very first moment they met. "Now I understand. The one I truly loved was you." The prince held a magnificent wedding, and he married the mermaid princess. She became human, and they lived happily ever after. This story teaches us that true feelings always get through, and when we value ourselves, we can become even happier. If you keep moving toward your dreams without giving up, good things will come, and wonderful endings are waiting for you.
Jack and the Beanstalk.
A long time ago, in a quiet village surrounded by tall mountains and wide fields, there lived a boy named Jack. Jack was kind-hearted and full of curiosity. He lived with his mother in a small cottage, and they were very poor. Their only possession of value was a cow which gave milk every day. Jack and his mother would sell the milk in the village to buy food. But one day, the cow stopped giving milk, and they had nothing left to eat or sell. With no other choice, Jack's mother decided to sell the cow. She asked Jack to take the cow to the market and sell it for as much money as he could get. Jack took the cow and started walking down the long road to the market. On the way, Jack met a strange old man. The man showed Jack 5 shiny beans and claimed they were magical. He said that if Jack planted them in the ground, they would grow all the way up to the sky. The man offered to trade the beans for Jack's cow. Though he wasn't sure at first, Jack felt something special about the beans and agreed to the trade. He returned home with the beans instead of money. When his mother saw what he had done, she was shocked and disappointed. She threw the beans out the window and sent Jack to bed without supper. The next morning, Jack woke up to something incredible. A giant beanstalk had grown overnight, reaching high into the clouds. It was so tall that the top of it disappeared into the sky. Jack's eyes sparkled with wonder and excitement. Driven by curiosity, Jack began climbing the beanstalk. Higher and higher he climbed until he reached the clouds. There, he discovered a large castle, so big that it could not have belonged to any ordinary human. It was the home of a giant. Jack quietly entered the castle and found gold coins, a goose that laid golden eggs, and a magical harp that could play music by itself. While the giant was asleep, Jack carefully took a bag of gold coins and escaped back down the beanstalk. His mother was overjoyed, and for a while they lived comfortably. But Jack kept thinking about the magical goose and the harp, so he decided to climb the beanstalk again. On his second visit, Jack managed to take the goose that laid golden eggs without waking the giant. The goose laid a golden egg every day, and Jack and his mother became even richer. Still, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the harp. He went up one more time and tried to take the harp from the giant's castle. But as soon as he picked it up, the harp shouted, "Master, help!" The giant woke up with a roar and began to chase Jack. Jack rushed down the beanstalk as fast as he could, with the giant following behind him. When Jack reached the ground, he called to his mother for an axe. He grabbed it and began chopping down the beanstalk. Just as the giant was halfway down, the beanstalk broke and came crashing to the ground. The giant fell with it and disappeared forever. After that, Jack and his mother lived happily. They never had to worry about money again, thanks to the golden eggs and the magical harp. Jack also learned valuable lessons from his adventure about bravery, cleverness, and making careful choices. This story teaches us that curiosity, courage, and a willingness to take risks can open the door to new opportunities. But at the same time, it reminds us that greed can bring danger, and it's important to act with wisdom and responsibility.
The 3 Little Pigs.
Once upon a time, there lived 3 little pigs who were very close siblings. One day, they decided to build their own houses to live independently. They believed it was important to have a safe and strong home for the future. The first pig wanted to finish quickly so he could relax. He chose to build his house with straw, as it was the easiest and fastest material to use. The house was built in no time, and he rested comfortably inside. However, the straw house was weak and would shake even with a small breeze. The second pig wanted a stronger house than the first, so he chose to build his home with wood. He carefully collected planks and hammered them together. It took a bit longer than the straw house, but he was satisfied with the result. Still, the wooden house was not as sturdy as it could be. The third pig was the most thoughtful of them all. He decided to take his time and build the strongest house possible using bricks. Brick by brick, he stacked them with cement and worked patiently for several days. Though it was hard work, the house he completed was very solid and safe. One day, a big bad wolf came to the village. He went to the first pig's straw house and demanded that the door be opened. When the pig refused, the wolf took a deep breath and blew the house down. The first pig was terrified and ran away. The first pig ran to the second pig's wooden house. They locked the door and hid inside, but the wolf followed them and shouted again. When they didn't open the door, the wolf huffed and puffed and blew down the wooden house too. The two pigs quickly ran to their youngest brother's brick house. The third pig welcomed them inside and locked the door. The wolf shouted again and blew as hard as he could, but the brick house did not move. It stood strong and firm no matter how hard the wolf tried. Frustrated, the wolf tried to climb down the chimney. However, the third pig had already lit a fire and was boiling water below. As the wolf came down, he fell straight into the hot water and screamed in pain. He quickly jumped out and ran away, never to return to the village again. The three pigs hugged each other with joy. The first and second pigs promised to learn from their younger brother and work more carefully in the future. From that day on, they lived together in the sturdy brick house, happy and safe. Doing things too quickly or too easily may cause big problems later. Even if it takes more time and effort, being careful and working hard brings the best and safest results.
Snow White.
Once upon a time, in a beautiful kingdom deep in the forest, there lived a kind and lovely princess named Snow White. She had skin as white as snow, hair as black as the night sky, and lips as red as a rose. But more than her beauty, Snow White had a heart full of kindness and warmth. One day, the queen passed away, and the king remarried a new queen. This new queen was very beautiful, but her heart was filled with jealousy and greed. She owned a magic mirror, and every day she would ask it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror always answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." However, as time passed, Snow White grew more and more beautiful. One day, when the queen asked the mirror the same question, it replied, "You are beautiful, my queen, but the fairest of them all is now Snow White." The queen was furious. Overcome with jealousy, she decided to get rid of Snow White. She ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and make sure she never returned. But the kind huntsman could not harm the innocent princess. Instead, he told her to run far away into the deep forest and never return. Snow White, frightened and alone, wandered through the dark woods until she found a small cottage. Carefully, she opened the door and stepped inside. Inside the cottage, there were 7 tiny beds lined up in a row. Feeling exhausted, Snow White lay down on one of the beds and fell into a deep sleep. This cottage belonged to 7 dwarfs who returned home that evening to find the sleeping princess. They were surprised at first, but felt sorry for her when she told them her story. The kind dwarfs welcomed Snow White into their home, and she happily lived with them, helping with chores and preparing meals. Meanwhile, the queen once again asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You are beautiful, my queen, but Snow White, who lives with the 7 dwarfs, is now the fairest of them all." The queen was filled with rage and decided to take matters into her own hands. She disguised herself as an old woman and made a poisoned apple. Then she traveled to the dwarf's cottage and knocked on the door. "Dear child, would you like to taste this delicious apple?" she said in a gentle voice. At first, Snow White hesitated, but when she saw the old woman take a bite from one side, she thought it must be safe. As soon as she took a bite, Snow White collapsed to the ground. That evening, when the dwarfs returned home, they found Snow White lying motionless on the floor. No matter how hard they tried, she would not wake up. Saddened, they could not bear to bury her, so they placed her in a beautiful glass coffin and watched over her every day. One day, a prince from a nearby kingdom happened to pass through the forest. When he saw Snow White lying in the glass coffin, he was captivated by her beauty and purity. He carefully opened the coffin and lifted her up. At that moment, a piece of the poisoned apple fell from Snow White's mouth. Suddenly, her eyes fluttered open, and she woke up. The dwarfs and the prince were overjoyed. The prince asked Snow White to come with him to his kingdom and live happily ever after. Snow White thanked the dwarfs for their kindness and bid them farewell. Then she rode off with the prince to his castle, where they lived happily ever after. This story teaches us that true beauty comes from kindness and a pure heart. It also shows that jealousy and greed can lead to bad consequences. Most importantly, when we are kind to others, we will always find friends who care for us.
Cinderella.
Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a beautiful and kind-hearted girl named Cinderella. She had a loving family, but her mother passed away when she was very young. Her father, wanting to give her a mother's love, remarried a woman who had 2 daughters of her own. At first, they seemed kind, but after her father also passed away, their true nature was revealed. Cinderella's stepmother and stepsisters were cruel and selfish. They treated her like a servant, making her do all the household chores from dawn until night. She wore old, ragged clothes and slept near the fireplace, which left her covered in cinders. Because of this, people called her Cinderella. And despite her hardships, she remained kind and never lost hope. One day, an exciting announcement came from the royal palace. The king was hosting a grand ball, and all the young ladies of the kingdom were invited. The prince was searching for a bride, and he would choose one among the guests. Cinderella's stepsisters were thrilled and spent days preparing their finest dresses. Cinderella, too, wished to go, but her stepmother laughed cruelly. "You? Go to the ball. Look at yourself. A servant like you could never stand before the prince." To make sure Cinderella couldn't go, her stepmother gave her even more work to do. On the night of the ball, the stepmother and stepsisters left in their elegant gowns, leaving Cinderella alone. Overwhelmed with sadness, she sat in the kitchen and wept. At that moment, a shimmering light appeared, and a kind old woman stood before her. "Why are you crying, my dear?" It was her fairy godmother. Cinderella explained her sorrow, and the fairy godmother smiled gently. "Don't worry, my child. I will send you to the ball." With a wave of her wand, she transformed a pumpkin into a golden carriage, mice into majestic horses, and lizards into loyal footmen. Finally, Cinderella's tattered dress turned into a dazzling blue gown, and sparkling glass slippers appeared on her feet. "But remember," the fairy godmother warned, "the magic will end at midnight. You must return before then." An overjoyed Cinderella rode the golden carriage to the palace. When she arrived, everyone was mesmerized by her beauty. No one recognized her, and the prince was immediately captivated. He approached her, took her hand, and they danced together all night. Time flew by, and before she knew it, the clock began striking midnight. Cinderella gasped and rushed away. As she ran down the palace steps, one of her glass slippers slipped off. But she couldn't stop. She fled before the magic wore off. And once outside the palace gates, she found herself in her old rags once more. The next day, the prince set out to find the mysterious girl who had left behind the glass slipper. He traveled throughout the kingdom searching for the one whose foot would perfectly fit the shoe. Many ladies tried to squeeze their feet into it, but none succeeded. Finally, the prince arrived at Cinderella's house. The stepsisters desperately tried to fit their feet into the glass slipper, but it was no use. When Cinderella asked if she could try, her stepmother protested, but the prince's servant allowed her to do so. To everyone's astonishment, the slipper fit her perfectly. Cinderella then took out the other glass slipper from her pocket, proving she was the one the prince was looking for. The prince was overjoyed and took Cinderella back to the palace. Soon, they were married in a grand wedding, and Cinderella became a kind and beloved queen. She forgave those who had wronged her and lived happily ever after. Cinderella's kindness and perseverance, even in the face of hardship, led her to happiness. This story teaches us that no matter how difficult life may seem, staying kind and hopeful will always bring good things in the end.
Rapunzel.
Once upon a time, in a deep forest, there was a very tall tower. In that tower lived a beautiful girl named Rapunzel. She had golden long hair, and her hair had magical powers. When she sang, it could heal the sick and restore youth. Upon discovering this, the witch Gothel locked Rapunzel in the tower. The witch made sure no one could enter the tower, and only she could visit Rapunzel. Every day, the witch would shout below the tower, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel would let her long hair down the window, and the witch would climb up it. Rapunzel was very curious about the outside world. However, the witch would warn her, the outside world is a dangerous place. There are bad people everywhere. The safest place for you is here. So Rapunzel spent all her time in the tower, singing, drawing pictures, and gazing at the sky. One day, a prince was riding through the forest and accidentally discovered the tall tower. He was curious and watched from afar. At that moment, the witch appeared and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then the long hair came down and the witch climbed up it. The prince was fascinated by this and decided to try it when the witch had left. Carefully, he called from below the tower, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel was startled. It was a voice she hadn't heard before. But curious, she let down her hair. The prince climbed up and met Rapunzel. Rapunzel was meeting a stranger for the first time. The prince told her about the beauty of the outside world, how the birds sang in the forest, the flowers bloomed, and the rivers sparkled. Rapunzel was eager to go, but she was afraid of the witch. But the prince gave her courage. "You shouldn't be locked in this tower alone. Let's escape and live freely together." Rapunzel hesitated, but eventually decided. The next night, the prince promised to bring a strong rope to help her escape. However, that evening, the witch noticed something was different about Rapunzel's expression. "Have you met someone?" the witch asked suspiciously. Rapunzel accidentally replied, "The prince is going to take me away." The witch became angry and cut off Rapunzel's long hair. Then she sent Rapunzel far away. That night, when the prince came to the tower, the witch was waiting instead of Rapunzel. The prince was shocked, and the witch attacked him. He ran into the forest, but he was blinded by thorns. The prince wandered the forest for a long time, unable to see. One day, he heard Rapunzel singing from somewhere. He followed the sound and found her. When Rapunzel saw the prince, she cried. She wiped his tears, and something amazing happened. Rapunzel's tears healed the prince's eyes. He could see again. The prince and Rapunzel returned to the castle together. Rapunzel saw the wide world for the first time. The blue sky, the sparkling river, and the beautiful flowers, all of it was wonderful and new. From then on, Rapunzel and the prince lived happily ever after. Rapunzel was initially afraid of the outside world, but she gathered courage to step into a new world. Sometimes new things can be scary, but with courage, a wider and more beautiful world awaits. Also, true love and a kind heart can create miracles. Never forget that.
Peter Pan.
A long time ago, in the foggy city of London, England, there lived the Darling family. In that house were 3 lovely children, Wendy and her 2 younger brothers, John and Michael. Every night before going to sleep, the children would share fairy tale-like stories and imagine magical lands and exciting adventures. Then one night, Wendy woke up to find the window open. And there, standing by the window, was a boy who could fly. His name was Peter Pan. Peter was a boy who would never grow up, and he lived on a magical island called Neverland. Next to him was a small, glowing fairy named Tinkerbell. She could be a little jealous, but she truly loved Peter. Peter Pan invited Wendy and her brothers to come with him to Neverland. He sprinkled them with fairy dust and said, "Think happy thoughts, then you can fly." In that moment, the 3 siblings began to soar through the sky. They flew past the nightlights of London, through the stars, and finally arrived at Neverland. Neverland was a wondrous land, just like the worlds they had imagined. There were native tribes and beautiful mermaids living there. But the most fearsome beings were the pirates, especially their captain, Captain Hook. Hook had once fought with Peter Pan and lost a hand, which was eaten by a crocodile. Since then, the crocodile had followed Hook everywhere, ticking like a clock, and Hook trembled with fear at the sound. Their days in Neverland were filled with thrilling adventures. Peter and the children dodged Hook's traps, danced with the natives, and sang with the mermaids. But as time went on, Wendy began to miss the real world. She thought of her parents, who must be worried, and decided it was time to return home. At first, Peter was sad and refused to go back with them. But eventually, he respected Wendy's choice and offered to take her and her brothers home. Just then, Captain Hook captured the children on his ship and threatened them. But Peter Pan appeared at the last moment and bravely fought Hook. He defeated the pirates and rescued his friends. Wendy and her brothers returned home through the window, and their parents embraced them warmly. Peter Pan returned to Neverland, still refusing to grow up, and continued seeking new adventures every day. Wendy sometimes looked out her window, remembering Peter and the magical time they had shared. Growing up doesn't mean losing your imagination. It means learning about deeper love and greater responsibility. Peter Pan chose to remain a child forever, but Wendy realized the importance of family and returning home. Let us also grow up while keeping our dreams and imagination close to our hearts.
Aladdin and the Magic Lamp.
Once upon a time, in a far-off eastern land, there lived a poor boy named Aladdin. Aladdin lived with his mother and they struggled to make ends meet, but he was a kind and pure-hearted boy. Although he sometimes played pranks and was lazy at times, he always had courage and goodness in his heart. One day, a mysterious stranger appeared before Aladdin. The man introduced himself as Aladdin's uncle and invited him to go on a journey. However, the man was actually an evil sorcerer who wanted to use Aladdin to obtain a long-hidden magical lamp. The sorcerer took Aladdin to a deep mountain where a large stone door stood. When the sorcerer recited an incantation, the door opened to reveal a cave full of shining treasures. The sorcerer told Aladdin to only retrieve the lamp and not touch any other treasure. Aladdin entered the cave and found the old lamp, but when he tried to leave, the sorcerer demanded the lamp be handed over before anything else. Aladdin asked the sorcerer to let him out of the cave first, but the sorcerer angrily closed the door, trapping Aladdin inside. Alone in the dark cave, Aladdin nervously rubbed the lamp, and suddenly, a great puff of smoke emerged, revealing a powerful genie. The genie, who could grant any wish to the holder of the lamp, appeared and helped Aladdin escape the cave. With the genie's help, Aladdin lived a prosperous life. He wore fine clothes, owned a grand palace, and became a well-respected figure who helped others. One day, Aladdin met a kind-hearted princess and fell in love with her. After gaining her approval, they lived happily together. However, the evil sorcerer, realizing that the lamp had come into Aladdin's possession, came up with another plan to steal the lamp. He infiltrated the palace and stole the lamp, intending to use the genie to take control of the palace and princess. Aladdin, however, did not give up. Using his wisdom and courage, he chased after the sorcerer. After a dangerous adventure, Aladdin defeated the sorcerer and regained the lamp. The genie returned to Aladdin's side, and he was reunited with the princess. From then on, Aladdin decided to rely not just on the genie's power, but on his own strength and efforts. He became a respected leader, always humble and willing to help others, living a life full of happiness. True strength comes not from magic, but from one's courage and wisdom. If you never give up, a path will always open, no matter the difficulty.
Little Red Riding Hood.
Once upon a time, in a quiet and peaceful village, there lived a young girl who always wore a red cloak. She loved the red cloak very much, as it was a handmade gift from her dear grandmother. The cloak was made from beautiful fabric and wrapped around her like petals of a red flower. Since she wore it all the time, the villagers called her Little Red Riding Hood. Little Red Riding Hood had a bright and kind personality, and she was a good girl who always listened to the words of her elders. She loved her grandmother very much, and her grandmother also adored her, often showing her affection through warm words and thoughtful gifts. One day, her mother heard that the grandmother was not feeling well. She decided to send food to the grandmother's house and prepared a basket with warm soup, fresh bread, honeyed tea, and some medicine. She carefully handed the basket to her daughter and asked her to deliver it to her grandmother's house, which was deep in the forest. Her mother gave her 2 important warnings. First, she should stay on the path and never wander off, as the forest could be dangerous. Second, she should not talk to strangers, no matter how friendly they might seem. Little Red Riding Hood nodded and promised to keep her mother's words in mind, then set off down the forest path. The forest was beautiful, with sunlight streaming through the leaves and birds singing in the trees. As she walked carefully with the basket in hand, she admired the wildflowers and fluttering butterflies along the way. While walking through the forest, she encountered a large wolf. The wolf appeared polite and calm, but inside, he was cunning and had bad intentions. He silently observed the girl and became curious about where she was going. Without saying a word, Little Red Riding Hood continued walking, thinking to herself that she was on her way to her grandmother's house with food and medicine. The wolf, moving quickly through a shortcut, reached the grandmother's house before Little Red Riding Hood did. He knocked on the door, pretending to be her granddaughter. The grandmother, believing it was her granddaughter, opened the door. At that moment, the wolf jumped in and swallowed the grandmother whole. Then he wore the grandmother's clothes, tied her headscarf, and lay in bed waiting for Little Red Riding Hood to arrive. Soon, Little Red Riding Hood reached her grandmother's house. She noticed the door was already open, which made her feel uneasy. Still, thinking her grandmother was unwell, she carefully stepped inside. The room was dark and quiet, and the grandmother was lying under the covers. As she approached, she sensed something strange. Her grandmother's hands were hairy. Her eyes looked unusually large, and her voice sounded deep and unfamiliar. But the wolf continued to pretend, staying silent and still in the bed. Suddenly, the wolf threw off the covers and leapt toward Little Red Riding Hood. She screamed in fear, and just at that moment, a nearby woodcutter, who had been chopping wood, heard her cries. He rushed into the house and broke through the door. When he saw the wolf, he raised his axe and swiftly subdued the beast. The woodcutter then carefully cut open the wolf's belly, and to everyone's relief, the grandmother was still alive inside. Thanks to the brave woodcutter, both Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother were saved. After that day, Little Red Riding Hood became more careful. She no longer picked flowers or wandered from the path, and she avoided talking to anyone she didn't know. This story teaches us that we must always listen carefully to the guidance of those who care for us and be cautious around strangers. Even someone who appears friendly on the outside may not have good intentions. The tale also reminds us that straying from the path due to curiosity or impulse can lead to unexpected danger.
Alice in Wonderland.
It was a warm and sunny spring afternoon. A girl named Alice was sitting by the riverbank with her sister, reading a book. Her sister was quietly flipping through the pages, but Alice was starting to feel bored. That was because the book had no pictures or conversations in it. Alice wondered, what's the use of a book without pictures or dialogue? Just then, something strange caught her eye. A white rabbit wearing a vest ran past her, pulled out a small pocket watch, and exclaimed, "Oh dear, I shall be late." The fact that the rabbit was talking was surprising enough, but seeing him look at a watch and dash away in panic was even more curious. Alice, driven by her growing curiosity, decided to follow the rabbit. The rabbit disappeared into a small hole beneath the bushes, and without hesitation, Alice jumped in after him. The hole was much deeper than she expected. Alice felt like she was floating gently downwards, like a feather. As she fell, she noticed shelves filled with books, clocks, paintings, and bottles with strange shapes along the tunnel walls. She didn't know how long she had been falling. It seemed endless. Finally, her feet touched the ground, and she realized she had arrived in a very strange place. Before her stood a very small door. Through it, she could see a beautiful garden, but she was too big to pass through. While looking around the room, Alice found a glass table with a bottle on top. A label on the bottle read, "Drink me." At first, she hesitated, but since the bottle didn't seem harmful, she gathered her courage and took a sip. Then, her body began to shrink until she was small enough to fit through the door. Once through the door, Alice entered a world so magical it seemed like it came straight from a dream. Talking flowers, flying fish, and animals walking on two legs filled the land. Alice marveled at everything and began exploring this fantastical world. She soon found herself at a very strange tea party. There, she met a Mad Hatter who spoke nonsense endlessly, a March Hare with a perpetually sleepy look, and a Dormouse dozing inside a teacup. They were always having tea because they had quarreled with time itself, and time had stopped. As a result, the tea party never ended, repeating over and over again. Eventually, Alice arrived at a palace where card soldiers were busily working. They were painting white roses red because the terrifying Red Queen hated white roses. The Red Queen was quick to anger and often shouted, "Off with their heads!" Everyone feared her, but Alice stood her ground and spoke firmly. "That's nonsense. You can't solve everything by cutting off people's heads." At first, the Red Queen was furious, but then she began to lose her words, caught off guard by Alice's confidence. At that moment, the palace began to shake, and everything swirled into chaos. Alice opened her eyes. She was back at the riverbank with her sister still reading beside her. It had all been a dream, but it felt so vivid and real that Alice knew she would never forget it. The tale of Alice in Wonderland teaches us the power of imagination. Even in ordinary daily life, stepping into the world of imagination can open our eyes to new perspectives and wisdom. It also shows us the importance of speaking up with courage and standing against what is wrong. The world is full of the unexpected, but if you believe in yourself and keep moving forward, wonderful adventures surely await you.
The Frog Prince.
Once upon a time, in a kingdom surrounded by deep forests and peaceful lakes, there lived a beautiful and beloved princess. Among all her treasures, she cherished a golden ball the most. On sunny days, she would leave the castle to play near a clear pond in the woods, tossing the ball high into the air and catching it with joy. One day, while playing as usual, the princess accidentally threw the golden ball too far, and it fell into the pond. The ball quickly sank into the deep, dark water, and the princess, unable to retrieve it, began to cry bitterly. The golden ball was the most precious thing she had. At that moment, something unexpected happened. A green frog appeared near the water's edge and offered to help retrieve the ball. However, the frog asked for something in return. He requested that the princess become his friend, allow him into the castle, share her meals with him, and let him stay by her side at bedtime. Although the princess had no intention of keeping such a promise, she quickly agreed, thinking only of getting her golden ball back. The frog dove into the pond and soon returned with the shiny ball. The princess took it joyfully and ran back to the castle. Without another word, ignoring the frog completely, that evening there was a knock at the castle door. To the princess's dismay, it was the same frog, reminding her of the promise she had made. The king, having overheard the situation, gently but firmly told the princess that a promise must always be honored, no matter who it was made to. Reluctantly, the princess allowed the frog to enter the castle. He sat beside her at dinner, eating from her plate, and afterward asked to sleep in her room. Although she was uncomfortable and displeased, she obeyed her father's command and let the frog rest at the edge of her bed. During the night, the frog quietly fell asleep, and the princess, too, drifted into slumber. When she awoke the next morning, the frog had vanished. In his place stood a handsome young prince. The prince thanked the princess, explaining that he was a royal from a neighboring kingdom who had been cursed by an evil spell, turning him into a frog. The only way to break the spell was to receive a gesture of true friendship and kindness. Because the princess had kept her promise and shown him warmth, even reluctantly, the enchantment had finally lifted. Over time, the prince and the princess came to understand and respect one another deeply. Eventually, they fell in love, married, and ruled their kingdom together with wisdom and happiness for many years. The Frog Prince teaches us not to judge others by their appearance alone. A promise once made should be kept, no matter how small or inconvenient it may seem. True kindness and a sincere heart have the power to break even the strongest curse, even when something seems unpleasant at first. It may lead to unexpected happiness and valuable relationships if approached with an open heart.
Did you enjoy today's story? Now it's time to go to Dreamland. See you again next time.